Welcome to Multifamily Grit, where we bring in the experts to share their stories of the celebrations and struggles of one of the most important industries in the U.S., multifamily property management. Kerri sat down with Cindy Thompson, Chief Executive Officer of the Chester Housing Authority, CHA in Pennsylvania. Cindy stepped into the role in September 2024 after the retirement of longtime Executive Director Stephen Fisher, bringing with her more than 25 years of experience across commercial, affordable, and public housing. She's a certified occupancy specialist, certified property manager, and certified public housing manager, with deep expertise in LIHTC compliance, housing choice voucher programs, and HUD performance management. Cindy's story is defined by her ability to navigate complexity while keeping community at the center. At the Alexandria Redevelopment and Housing Authority, she oversaw affordable housing and asset management programs, setting the stage for her leadership at Chester. Now, at CHA, she leads an agency managing 2,400 affordable housing units and vouchers, and one known for innovative, resident-focused initiatives like the nationally recognized Ruth Bennett Community Farm, which transforms public housing land into a working urban farm that feeds and empowers residents. Today, we dive into how Cindy is leading Chester Housing Authority into its next chapter, shedding the troubled designation of years past and steering towards stability, growth, and resident engagement. We'll explore the myths around affordable housing, why she believes compliance requires creativity, how she's partnering with unlikely allies like DA's offices and municipalities to bring resources back into housing, and what innovations or policy shifts could change the game for public housing in the next decade. This is a conversation for anyone who's ever wondered how leadership, community, and resourcefulness come together in the affordable housing world. Before we get started, we are sponsored today by the only core property management operating system built with an emphasis for affordable owners and operators. Fortress revolutionizes affordable management with features focused on automating housing assistance charges and payments to keep ledgers clean and accurate, centralizing file reviews and document storage through Fortress and AWS, and a free in-system smart waitlist to ensure your property stays in compliance. And don't forget, if you like what you hear today, please like, subscribe, and share with someone you think would enjoy this episode. Now let's get into it. Here's Kerri Davis sitting down with Cindy Thompson for a conversation about leadership, community, and what it takes to transform affordable housing for the future.
Cindy, thank you so much again for being here today.
Kerri, thank you for having me.
And before we dig in, Cindy, I want to ask you the question that I ask all of my guests for the first question. Would you mind sharing with our listeners how you got your start in the industry?
Many years ago. No, but I actually stumbled onto property management while I was in college through a temp agency, and did a variety of different types of temp assignments. But when they sent me to an apartment community, that was the first time that I really got a chance to see behind the scenes what happened and how it worked. And that sort of was my bug, because it was an environment that was fast paced. It was always something to do. I didn't have to watch the clock waiting for 5 o'clock to come. And from that point, I just took off. My first full-time position actually was in commercial real estate. And I started out as a receptionist there, and then transitioned into residential property management, and then into affordable at the Housing Authority. So I've done the gamut, I think, of what we all do in the property management arena.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you actually started in commercial. Most of my stories don't start there. Let me ask, was there something that motivated you to move from commercial into multifamily?
Actually, I was interested in HUD. I did not really understand what they did, but at least from what I knew at the time, I felt that their initiatives were more resident focused. So for individuals versus, businesses in a commercial setting. And I like to sort of learn from experience. I'm a hands-on type of learner. And that was probably one of the biggest things that I'll say pulled me into that transition, because people always say that it usually works in reverse, where most of us start in residential and then move into commercial. And I sort of
Yeah.
did it in reverse, but it was more so I wanted to learn more about HUD, how it operated, and then how to get the services directly to people, to individual versus businesses.
What motivated that? Why were you so interested with HUD and finding a way to bring the resources to the people?
I will say it had a lot to do with my upbringing, a native Washingtonian, born and raised, a Gen Xer. And so during the time that, I was growing up in DC, we were sort of coming into that changing landscape where in my neighborhood, once upon a time, everybody's front door was open. You could just run from house to house. And then, just the environment itself changed. And so a lot of that support and looking out for each other went away. It wasn't a community oriented thing, but at least from what I read about HUD and its initiatives, that was one way, to get those things back into the community.
Yeah, I love that. That's a beautiful story. Well, obviously, you did take the path into understanding HUD and how to bring those resources to the people. That's what you're doing today. So, let me ask you've moved into this role, the CEO role at the Chester Housing Authority. And what has been let me actually start with what is your role at the Chester Housing Authority? What do you do? What are your responsibilities?
Well, as the CEO, well, I guess I can start with the board's goals when they were going
Okay.
through the recruitment process, because the housing authority, well, I'll say Chester City is a part of Delaware County. And so there is another larger housing authority, but we service primarily the city of Chester specifically. And during my research, I know I was intrigued when I found out that Chester was actually the first official city in the state of Pennsylvania. But, with the change in industries, the city itself has gone through a lot of hardship and strife, but the
Mm,
people there are very committed, to their area and to the revitalization of the area. Our board also, we've had a good transition, because we've had some residents who have were program participants and went on, to transition away from the program, and then came back and served in other capacities, including as board members. And so, again, it just sort of centered back to what my focus is, which is making sure that the services get to the people who need them. Um, when I came on board, it was a unique time in Chester, because we had a new mayor. There's a new superintendent for schools. And so the mayor joked about us being the freshman class, because we all sort of started at the same time with very similar challenges, and just a commitment to work together, because one, it's necessary, but two, it's, again, our core mission, which is to make sure that the residents in the city of Chester get, everything that they deserve. From the housing landscape, I will say just public housing in general, more so the way that the programs were designed, they did not think about markets and market trends. So
mm.
the expenses that are related to maintaining them has always been a challenge for us. But I think that now legislators and HUD understand that. And so we're beginning to have broader conversations that bring us closer into alignment with what traditionally happens in, the property management industry. And that's one of the things that I've been able to sort of bring with me from Alexandria to Chester, because we did those same things in Alexandria when I went started on board there in 2006.
Okay. Well, it's a complex role and obviously a massive amount of responsibility in coming in at that time when the city was experiencing that kind of resurgence and refocus on bringing those funds to the neighbor or to the residents. I really love the story that you tell of the residents who were formerly recipients of these funds who are now helping advocate for them and play a larger role in this entire process. I feel like that's not a story that I hear very often. What do you think has allowed Chester to create that sort of culture?
Well, I think that it probably happens more often than what people realize. As
Okay.
public housing authorities, I don't think that we've done necessarily the best job of telling our stories because it's always yet just about the work. We don't think about, sharing the information about, how the programs actually work and how they ultimately benefit the families who receive the assistance from them. And I know at least myself and a lot of my colleagues, both in Pennsylvania and in the DC metropolitan area, that's one of the things that we're trying to focus on. We've always had resident associations, but how we empower the resident associations, I think that landscape now is changing because they are really the drum majors for justice, so to speak, because they are, boots on the ground. And those are the people who know firsthand, hey, when I came in, what the waiting list process was like when they first received assistance, and then what supportive services, either inside or outside of the housing authority, help them to transition. So I think we're doing a better job. It's just that we have not in the past, but it's happened across the country.
Yeah, well, that's really great to hear, and I can see how that is wildly beneficial for the communities, for those who have actually experienced the funding and experienced the program to be those adjudicating for it, for the residents. So I think that's fantastic. Um, you've talked a little bit about what the board was looking for, and the Chester as a community when you stepped in, but what was actually your first priority when you stepped in and took the helm of CHA?
Um, I wanted to be sure that we are building capacity within the organization. Frequently, and sometimes it's just due to necessity because of timing and a plethora of other reasons, we contract out a lot of work instead of giving our staff the opportunity to train and to keep that money in house. It also puts us in a position where we're able to do performance based systems where instead of just the cost of living increase, those employees that are going above and beyond, taking on additional duties or even starting initiatives, they can be rewarded monetarily for those experiences. So um, trying to put or get a general understanding of where we stood, at least when I was coming in, and then to get the feedback. I had literally one-on-one meetings with all of the staff when I started there. Everybody thought I was crazy. But, sometimes people are, apprehensive when they're trying to speak in front of a group, even though it's people that they've worked with for the last decade. But when you're, telling your truth, sometimes it's easier, when it's a audience of one. And the intel was invaluable. I was able to share that information with the board at my following board meeting after I started and got authorization for some employee retreat and approval to do some expenditures for some training outside of what we would customarily do. And so far, it's paid big dividends. The morale within the organization is in a very good place.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. How many people were on your team? And you say that you had to do those one-on-ones. How many people was that?
Oh, I have 48 employees. But I've always had
Wow.
an open door policy everywhere that I've worked. So it didn't seem like it was anything different than that. Everybody doesn't come at once because usually, people want to get a feel for who you are. But ultimately, they end up, doing court sometime in my office at some point in the juncture. I would say at this year end because I'm literally right up against the 1 year anniversary of me coming now. Yet everybody is a lot more comfortable, just coming in and pitching ideas to me or, speaking to me about, things that they would like to see happen in the agency.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I think that, you know, we talk a lot. It's amazing to me how often um leaders talk about the culture of their company and
Mhm.
what that means. but yet, they haven't met or they don't know
Right.
everyone within their company, and, like, the people are your culture, like, that, you don't create I don't believe that you create culture by, like, your PTO policy or whether or
Right.
not you have ping pong tables in the office. Like, it's about the people define the culture, and so if you don't know them, you don't really know what your culture is.
Absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, like, culture and understanding and maybe even, misunderstanding um, of the atmosphere or how things are happening or what's happening within your company or even within the government, you actually are really passionate about dispelling myths around affordable housing. What does that mean to you?
Oh, so many things. I would say probably the most common misconception about residents or program participants who are eligible for our program is that they don't work, or that it is welfare, however you define that, depending on where you are in the country. And that is absolutely not the case. The large majority of recipients of the Housing Choice Voucher, public housing, and LIHTC programs are employed individuals. But there is a huge difference between being unemployed and underemployed. And I think that that
Okay.
is what the issue is. A lot of metropolitan areas, we have, I think we're getting better. We're making some headway, but we've always had these huge gaping holes where the middle income families are supposed to be. So we've had extremely low income folks, and then we've had extremely high income individuals. And there was really nothing in between. For the voucher program, for example, we do have requirements where there's a certain percentage of admission. So 75% of all new admissions have to be at or below 30% of AMI. And for public
Oh,
housing, it's 40%. But everyone that's coming in doesn't fall into that category. So sometimes we will have individuals who it could just be, like I said, they're underemployed, but they are gainfully employed, but they can't afford to pay a market rate rent, not a $2,000 rent, which is very customary for most 2 to 3 bedroom units in most cities. So I always lead with that because people, you usually see their brows furrow when I mention that. No, more than 75% of program participants. And this is data that HUD publishes regularly, but somehow, and it's never in small print. We always want to blow it up so that they can see it, but it seems to escape people because they just automatically lump it in with historically how people have viewed welfare, or the fact that they don't want anything better for themselves, which also is not true. Um, where we have a gap in the services that we provide is that housing agencies do just that, and we're funded for just that, providing housing. So the supportive services component is only brought in usually through partnerships that we have, with our local jurisdictions. And it's essential in order for families to even be able, to make those types of transitions. So if you don't have those relationships, then it's not as if they can't do it on their own, but it helps when you're able to sort of connect the dots for the families that need the assistance connecting the dots. So we've spent a lot of time, I know, within our industry trying to work on that, in our continuum of care. Now, housing is not just a label. They're actually bringing in the practitioner. So when decisions are being made about funding or regulations or programming, we're all there at the same time to make those decisions.
oh, there's so many things I want to dig into here. Um, I'm trying to figure out where I want to go first. Let's talk about supportive housing because, um, actually, no, I'm going to take one step back because I want to ask you this question just because, obviously I'm incredibly passionate about affordable housing, but I will also own the fact that there is a lot about it that I'm still ignorant to. And and I use that term in the clinical sense, not in the, not with any sort of intonation to it. There's a lot I don't know. And I
Right.
think there's so many people don't know about affordable housing. So I want to ask you this question, just in case our our listeners don't know, um, what do you mean by underemployed? And would you mind sharing where you are, or in within the um, Chester Housing Authority space? Like, what is 30% of AMI and what's 40% of AMI? What do those numbers mean?
Well, it, it will depend. So every year, HUD will release information telling us what the median income is, but it's based typically on census data. And again, if I'm in an area where there are a lot of higher income individuals that's surrounding me, those numbers can be skewed. So when you look at a chart for a Virginia or for a Pennsylvania, you would are more likely to see a $108,000 income as the median income, where most of the people that we're servicing, there could be four people in a household working and still not make $108,000. And so that
Yeah.
30% of $108,000 is a pretty high threshold for folks that are working at a Walmart or a Target. And especially in cities like Chester, like we don't even have a major grocer right now. That's one of the things that the
Wow.
mayor and council are working on. We had a joint meeting when I started with HUD, and we were talking about choice neighborhood and how we could work together, the housing authority with the municipality, on initiatives like that, because we need the jobs in the city. There's not a lot of, well, we have SEPTA, but it's not mass transit in the sense of New York or of Philly. So it would take you, much longer to leave from Chester to, make it over into Philadelphia, which is the next closest major MSA from us. So we think about things like that because challenges with transportation and childcare are two of the major impediments for the people that we serve when they are trying to, obtain upward mobility or self-sufficiency, as we like to call it. But again, I think
Yeah.
that we're thinking outside of the box. And when I say outside of the box, it's outside of what our norms are. Today, I had a gentleman reach out. He wanted to partner with us because the organization that he works for, it services Pennsylvania, but specifically he focuses on Delaware County. And as he started to run down the list of services, it was absolutely everything that we internally had been talking about. How do we beef up our resident services portion? And we know that there are some things that our staff can handle directly, and then there are some things that we needed to partner with. But I said, this is how you know that it was aligned in the stars, because we didn't even have to go out and look for him. He actually reached out to us. And so towards the end of this month, we're going to start to engage and have those resident meetings. He's even agreed to, with the example that I was just giving you about the unemployed and underemployed, do two sessions. So one during the day, for my residents that are unemployed, and then one later in the evening after, normal business hours for my residents that are underemployed and maybe, looking to get additional training so that they can get a higher paying job. But I feel like you're on the right track when things like that happen. Like you have the conversation, it's like you put it out into the universe, and then the resources start to align themselves. So I'm like, okay, we're on the right track.
I really, really appreciate that. And I actually agree. I'm not, I'm slightly spiritual in that way too. I think there are so many things that can happen in life that you can will or breathe into existence
Mhm.
just by having the conversations and having the thoughts and thinking about it big picture, and also by doing the right things on your side,
Right.
right? I mean, like, you're doing the things and you're showing up and you're there and you're a person that he sees and is excited about working with because you're creating this structure and you are so focused on what you're doing, right? I mean, it's like, um, I, I actually started a nonprofit about 7 years ago that had a lot of different programs along the way, but ended in with a program that we were incredibly proud of that provided free after school care for about 100 inner city Title I children in
Right.
elementary schools.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to, like, in a lot of ways, to allow what unfortunately is a demographic that heavily sways on single moms
Mm.
who struggle to stay gainfully employed post the time their child gets out of school, right? Because they can't afford care for their child. So either they have to quit working, or their child has to go home alone
Right.
to, neighborhoods that probably aren't so great,
Mm.
and for that child to be in. And honestly, they're too young anyway, but sometimes those kids have to grow up a little faster. So anyway, we did that, and it was amazing. The schools that ended up receiving the most attention from us were just the ones who had the principals who showed up and who put in the extra energy and who answered our calls, because I
Right.
can't tell you how many schools didn't
Didn't.
answer our phone calls when
Hmm.
we called to ask them if we could come in and provide programming.
And it usually happens that way. I know when I first arrived at the authority, my first round of resident meetings, I had a lady that came up to me, and I thought she was a resident, but I didn't realize that she wasn't until she started to ask her question, and I paid attention to her uniform. I thought she was a police officer, but she was a school resource officer.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so she had just heard from the community that, oh, the housing authority was having a meeting. And so she came to ask me, well, based on what she was seeing happening at her school. She had a lot of truancy, which was her responsibility. But then when she would, connect with the kids, a lot of times it was, the young single moms, and they didn't have childcare, so they weren't coming to school. But as she would dig into it a little bit more, a lot of it was that they didn't have housing, period. And so she didn't know how to direct them. And the principal, was, reaching out, trying to do different things. But it was just one of those things where, happenstance conversation that she had with just somebody that she knew in the community. And we were having a meeting that same night where she was able to come in and at least, get some foundation information so that, we could start, a different conversation, because the city does have resources. Most cities have resources, but it's very difficult to dissect and understand as an individual, okay, where do I go, or how do I start this process? So as service providers, it's beneficial for us to know not only what we do, but again, what services our partners offer, because that quick phone call or email cuts down, the leg time for that individual, making, the probability of success for them higher. We don't see it as a challenge. We do it every day. But if I'm asking you
Yeah.
and you're saying you don't know or call this person, more than likely they won't if they don't have the connection.
Yeah. Whoa, Cindy, that was a it's tough to hear, thinking about children at school who don't have a home to go to, right? I mean, like, I started the story with a tough concept of, a kindergartner having to go home after school by himself, but it gets way worse than that. Like, that's, so it's amazing though, right, that you're holding these meetings, and to your point earlier, like, willing these things into existence, like you're holding these meetings so that the school resource officer can show up, can have that conversation with you, can start the conversation with the with even more programming providers to see how assistance can be provided. Was there an outcome in this situation? Like, were there groups that were able to come together and help?
Yes, in the Delaware County, there is an organization called the Foundation, and she just recently retired, but they have had an amazing executive director, and I believe they said she's run the organization. It may have been more than um, 30 years. Frances was spearheading things, and she's still going to be in the background, but she is one of those in all be all resources. If you want to know how to connect the dots, I know plenty of times there were things that were going on. You give your card to people and then they'll call you, and it doesn't have anything to do with Chester Housing Authority. And I frequently hear, I just remember you were nice during the meeting, so I just figured that you could help me. And so for me, that's my trigger for send an email to Francis, or can let me call Francis. But in 10 minutes, she'll have four different providers on the call to say, hey, here's the attorney, here's the social worker, and lay all the groundwork out. And like I said, connect the dots for you. When you have those types of champions, people who have made it their life work, that also makes the work that we do a lot easier.
Man, everyone needs a Francis. That's amazing. So, this is something that you've talked a lot about too, the importance of bringing the groups together collectively to achieve goals, and specifically around funding, right? I mean, you've mentioned that you have to get creative today in order to bring forth the funding that you need in order to support your community. So what groups are you working with specifically, and what sort of goals are you achieving in bringing these groups together?
Well, I think when we say from a funding standpoint, we are trying some, again, non-traditional approaches
Yeah.
for housing authorities. There are so many different nonprofits and foundations that have endowments, and traditionally we've always done or applied for, I'll say, I call them formula grants because they're usually, oh, here's the form, fill in the blanks, and let us know how much money you're trying to request, even when it's a competitive process. But we have not employed or had contracts with grant writers who specifically said, okay, housing authority, what initiative do you want to hold up, and what funding do you think is going to be required in order to not just start it but to maintain it, and let's write a grant targeted to that, and then do the outreach to the foundations that we know you know issue that type of funding. And so that is something that's new for us, that we are embarking on in our new season. We've looked at a couple of, and we've actually had some folks that have approached us because it sort of goes hand in hand. Anytime you're doing any type of redevelopment, there's usually some type of uh, nonprofit or somebody with an endowment attached to it in some way. But we know that there are more ways that they would assist if they knew that the need existed. And I'm very good at making sure that they understand that the need exists. So, again, with our resident services, that's one of the primary initiatives. HUD has traditionally, we've had what they call family self-sufficiency programs. Those programs, the way that the funding sources are set up, it usually just pays for the coordinator salaries, not for the activities of the actual program. It's the coordinators who do the outreach with their yeah, coordinating committee to try to bring the funding in. But we want to take a more holistic approach because there's so many different avenues. We've always sort of propped up go to college, or job readiness, or how to improve a job. We want to push a little bit more entrepreneurship, especially in 2025, because that's a bigger thing. And two things can be true at the same time. You can have a 9 to 5 and work on your
Absolutely.
entrepreneurial endeavors. But that was the great thing about the FSS program, because it was designed for families who were unemployed or underemployed, because as their household income increased, the difference between what we paid on their behalf when they came in and what we ended up paying when they left every year goes into an escrow account. There's a contract of participation that's for 5 years. At the end of the 5 years, whatever is in the account, the family receives a check for that amount. And in Alexandria, we had a really big program. And one of my defining moments, at least while I was there, is I had a resident. She was on TANF when she came into the program, and she went to college and got a very good paying job. And so by the time she left, when she graduated, she got a check for $32,000, and
That's
she
amazing.
bought a house and got off the program. But yeah, that was sort of the feather in the cap moment, I think, for me and for my staff, because again, it's one of those, it's work for us. We do it every day. We don't think about it. We just do it. But then when you have the residents come back and they talk about, I wouldn't have been able to do this without you, or this program, and thanking you. And then even after graduation, coming back to say, how can I help? I can speak at other meetings to get residents to participate, or help people with their goals for their contract of participation. So with or without the actual title, I think that that's something that at least housing authorities would benefit from, just the principles surrounding it. So it may not be, an escrow check, but everything else that goes along with it is just as beneficial and rewarding. It's one of the primary things that I love about the public housing resident services programs that we offer.
Absolutely. I mean, you should be so, I can't even imagine how incredibly proud you and your team are of stories like that and the creativity that you've brought into this programming that could easily just be so stagnant. And you, like many government type programs, you continue year over year in the same way, but bringing this sort of creativity and finding non-typical ways of working with other groups and other sources of funding is really brilliant and honestly should be highly applauded, Cindy. It's really incredible. You've also spoken quite a bit about the importance of working with other stakeholders like the DA's office or the mayor's office and even local engineering firms. What do these relationships bring to the table in terms of partnerships? It's probably not the funding side of the house, but what do they bring to the table that the housing authority can't access alone?
Yeah, it's definitely the support. It's much easier in the process to have everybody at the table at the beginning of the making process versus after you've started an initiative and to try to revamp it, especially when you know that you're aligned in your goals and your objectives. So I know that, like I said, the mayor and city council, as well as the DA's office, when we think about, what they do traditionally, we think about, okay, running the city and then, the DA's office, for crime prevention. But it's so much more than that because all of the things like housing, the school systems, they feed into those goals and objectives. Most recently, we re-engaged in, uh, bi-weekly calls, sort of check-ins, and it's titled crime prevention initiatives, but it usually leads into other things, of course, because we start to talk about the needs of the communities, especially as we start to try to revitalize them. We do have, I'll say, Parks and Recs as an example. So, but we are looking at the demographics of the families that not only we serve, but just the families in the city of Chester, period. And so they have
Okay.
had a consultant that they've worked with that sort of, based on statistics, but also what's happening in Chester and what our goals are, giving us a roadmap that is forecasting, hey, these are the things that you guys could collaborate on and focus on as you do your day-to-day work. Our redevelopment, as an example, every city has a main street, regardless of what the main street is called. We all have one. But when we do our work in silos, if I'm only focused on what I need to do at my development and not what the plan is for that area as a whole, it can hurt us more than it helps us. So us, yeah, talking through those things ahead of time, it helps make the systems that we put in place fluid. So we don't just make pretty buildings, but we make a sustainable community. And I think that that's what our objective is. I know the mayor wants to see multiple layers of housing because, again, right now we are very low income housing heavy in the city of Chester. We don't have a lot of workforce housing, and that is a major initiative that we'll be working on together. And then hopefully, through redevelopment, drawing in some of the bigger box stores and potentially having, some luxury housing. The bigger the tax base, the more money that we get for the city of Chester. And that's always will be the objective ultimately. So I feel in those ways. And I'll say some uncustomary ways because just because you're a city council person or you're the district attorney, yeah, customarily I'll call you about, hey, some security or crime issues, but they're also pillars in their community. So I know that they have access to resources or at least knowledge because me being a new person acclimating myself into Pennsylvania and Delaware County specifically, they have information that I don't. And everyone has been very kind and, made themselves available to me both professionally and personally when it comes to, hey, if you need to know about better restaurants or schools, if neighborhoods that are good for housing if you're relocating to the area. So good relationships have been fostered over the course of this year. Looking forward to what's to come.
Yeah, and that's wonderful. And it's obviously so important to have those relationships, and you've clearly defined the value that they can bring. And I love the way that you are so conscientious of the holistic community, not just the new development that's being built, but something actually kind of triggers a comment that in my mind, a comment that you made earlier, because the holistic approach that you're speaking of, and just the understanding of the ecosystem, not just the entity, it seems like a lot of that would need to be determined through data and access to data. And this is a little bit of a jump, but I think it's still, really could be pulled back to it. But you've actually said that tech is almost an oxymoron in affordable housing, but we usually get most of our data from tech. So, you what why did you say that, first of all? Why is tech almost an oxymoron in affordable housing? And if that's the case, then what are you doing right now, and how are you leveraging, finding, and or resourcing the data or the information that you need in order to help push these initiatives?
Well, I mean, cost is always an impediment for tech.
Okay.
I mean, to have,
Yeah.
the most innovative solutions, they come with a pretty hefty price tag. And when you make those types of commitments, it's very difficult to sort of change gears midstream because a lot of the equipment and the software is proprietary. So it's almost like you have to scratch and start all over. Again,
Yeah.
the one I'll say thing that we've had working to our advantage is every month through our requirements for HUD, every housing authority, we transmit records with tenant data. And so
Okay.
that particular database, although, we're able to track the trends specifically as it relates to our housing authority, there are also auxiliary reports that will let you see, based on your area, your state, or, the United States as a whole. And it definitely does assist us. But I would say the verification process of it probably is more brought into line through our engagement with each other through industry organizations, conferences, seminars, because that's where we really get to like pick each other's brains about things. And if there is a way around things or a funding source that we aren't familiar with that the large majority of us could benefit from, that's usually where you will get that information. But I also have, especially here in Chester, through my early engagement with the DA's office, realized that, for things like our security cameras, as an example, which, we always want to have the most current technology, but that's also very expensive. But they have access to funding resources at a state level that we don't qualify for. And so when you make your stakeholders aware that, hey, this is an objective for us and these are the challenges or potential impediments, then they can say, oh, well, I get this funding. I may not be able to give you 50% or 100%, but something is better than nothing, especially when, you still have to make those things work. And that has kind of been how things have worked for us so far as it relates to our technology. We're still doing a lot of, outreach. We've done some IT audits so that we can kind of anticipate not just what the current expenses are, but what's forecasted, because that planning helps. We do our budgets annually, but we usually have to forecast in advance for 5 years for our federal funding. And it's hard to allocate those dollars and then move them around when you don't really have, a roadmap and that type of data. The reports we get from HUD and that just speaking to our industry partners is usually our primary tools that we use.
Yeah. Well, that makes so much sense and is obviously very resourceful given the constraints of funding and the cost of the most innovative tech. Um, I want to kind of change gears a little bit now and actually talk about something a little more uplifting um, than the struggle, because this is something that honestly I really loved reading about, and I have a feeling our listeners are really going to enjoy hearing about. But CHA is nationally recognized for the Ruth Bennett Community Farm that was mentioned actually in the introduction. Can you tell me a little bit about that and why it's so special?
Oh, the Ruth Bennett Farm is an urban farm, literally in the middle of our largest public housing development. But you have to give credit where credit is due. And our farm manager, Natanya, this is something that she is very passionate about on all levels. She's also been, I would say, one of my inspirations. And birds gave me a bird's eye view into grants and stepping outside of the box when you pursue, I'll say, passion projects, because a lot of the resources that have come into the farm, she initiated them. But
Okay.
it's one of those feel good pieces because it serves multiple purposes. For one, the thing that kind of blew me away when I got there is they actually have a beekeeper. And so he harvests the honey, from the actual bees, and he can give you the whole history. And that was not something that I was expecting when they were telling me that we had an urban farm. But she literally plans out every aspect of what they will plant from season to season. She also does flowers, but the most engaging component was, and it was sort of unofficial thing that became official thing, was a youth program that grew out of it. The children in the neighborhood were asking about working or having jobs. And so she started out with, one or two kids that were able to help over the summer. And that just, grew legs and walked. And now Jojo, one of the kids that started at the very early stages of the program, is actually back now, and he supervises the younger kids, during the program. So it's come full circle, but it's the thing that everybody loves to see. And when they harvest the fruits and vegetables, we box them, and they give them away to our residents as well as anyone else in the city of Chester that needs them. She brings in different types of speakers. It's a full on experience, but I think it's one of those experiences that you definitely have to be there to get the full magnitude of it. My first call, my field office, when I was talking to them about redevelopment, my field office director, before I could get two words out, she said, "But this won't impact the farm, will it?" And so I just started laughing because I said, she's not even in our same jurisdiction, but even in Philly on the weekends when the farm is doing their distribution, especially when Natanya has the flowers, everybody makes time to come past, whether to help or to get a box or to, they do sell the flowers for the proceeds, but she makes beautiful arrangements, but they do amazing work there.
That's absolutely beautiful. I can imagine that while your words are really inspiring, I can imagine that actually stepping foot on it and seeing what honestly, I mean, it almost brings tears to my eyes thinking about like kids out there like being excited about something like that.
Mhm.
I mean, honestly, any child being excited about like not being on a screen, but these kids, who are experiencing, what we in America would consider like for hard circumstances, but like being excited about, walking onto this farm and creating something and doing something with their own hands is really beautiful. I can imagine it's probably hard for words to do it justice, the feeling of
Yeah.
actually being there and seeing it happen.
Yeah. And the
Yeah.
staff, they're very committed. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Cindy, this leads really well into my next question that I'm really excited to hear your answer to, actually, because you are obviously so passionate about what you do and so informed, so educated about this world. what do you think the future of public housing and the future of supporting our communities and our residents who are in need? What do you think the future looks like?
Um, mm, that's a broad question.
It is.
I would say from a programmatic perspective, when we look at the landscape of what we offer right now, because we typically don't have the resources to sustain the conventional old public housing, um, we will eventually see a transition where most, if not all, of affordable housing that is offered through the housing authority is either low income housing tax credit or some sort of voucher based subsidy. Because voucher based subsidy can be tenant based, where they have mobility, or it can be attached to a unit. But it's actually just necessary at this point in order for us to be able to physically maintain them, because we get higher revenues with the voucher rents versus the operating funding that's available to us for public housing. So that, I think, is a win-win, and it removes the constraints, because sometimes as families are obtaining self-sufficiency, they mobility is necessary, and it's easier to do that even if you have a project-based voucher type of subsidy, because it can transition into a tenant-based subsidy that allows you to move. um, we also would like to see, I would say, more home ownership opportunities. Most people don't know that that
Mm.
is possible with a housing choice voucher, and a lot of families have been successful. It works very similar to the way the rental assistance does, where we will assist them with paying part of the mortgage. But at least based on the data that we've received, families that do go into home ownership, they are able to maintain the properties. We have a very high success rate, and usually within the first 5 years, they have transitioned from the subsidy altogether, and they're paying 100% of their mortgages. I would love to see a bigger emphasis on home ownership. I think that that's sometimes the part that is missing when we say, "Oh, we want self-sufficiency," but then we don't name it. We don't say what it's supposed to look
Yeah.
like, and that's just one way to do it. But um, those are some of the things that I see for affordable housing. But more, I would say, explanations or information sessions at a layperson's level about other programs. Because when I say live tech, if you aren't a housing practitioner, you have no clue what I'm referencing. And they don't know that they're driving past a live tech property every day, because it, for all intents and purposes, is a regular apartment community. It's just,
Mhm.
the tax credits help keep the
Yep.
rents reduced. But that's a major way that affordable housing has been able to continue to exist, because we don't have a lot of funding sources and options available to us. What We can't go to the conventional market the same way that most other housing providers can. That live tech has been a saving grace for us. So I hope that we are able to expand that program, and it becomes plentiful across the country. I think with those things at least coupled as our stair step, it will very easily take us through the next 10, 20 years. Because sometimes it takes that long just to get through one cycle of, I'll say, a conversion from one program to the next. But those are lofty objectives we've had as an industry for a while, but we're starting to see it um, more commonly, I would say, within the last 5 to 10 years.
Mhm. Absolutely. Cindy, this conversation has been really wonderful, and you are obviously a voice and a representative of many similar positions across the United States that are really focused on giving back and taking care of our communities and those who are unhoused or underhoused or unemployed or underemployed. And I want to give you space right now, actually, because so far the message that you have shared has been so incredible, and you're so knowledgeable on this topic. So I just want to make sure before we move on into our last few questions that I've given you the space to share anything you want to share with our listeners, or to hit home any message that you would like to make sure that someone walks away from this conversation understanding, or realizing, or maybe thinking about twice.
Um, I would say for the community at large, um, we always need volunteers, and there's no shortage of industries. And even if you don't have any specific professional background, sometimes just having access to those additional resources of people when you have projects and programming that you're trying to do, it, it's just as valuable as the dollars, as the resources. Um, so I used to, and I encourage my counterparts in the affordable housing arena. Once a month, I always had on the calendar wherever I worked information sessions. And that would be whether it was a person coming in off the street trying to understand what services they might qualify for, or for a landlord or anyone looking to do business with us, just to explain the housing authority, affordable housing, and how the programs work. I would also volunteer my services to go around to other organizations, shelters, any place where, anything related to housing, to explain to them, because that is also just as valuable. So if there was anything that I wanted to make sure that, again, that the public at large understands, is that the need is always there. And sometimes people are looking for a way to give back. It really is just as simple as calling into the housing authority. I can guarantee you we will not turn you away.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of times, I, I think that, to your point, the community at large, I think, is largely philanthropic. I really do. I think most people want to give back, receive that kind of rush of endorphins from giving and giving back. But I think a lot of times there's a fear around it, or just the unknown,
Right.
right? Like the fear of failing even at it, like the fear of like finding a place, or being able to have the skills, or the means to even contribute or to be helpful. And so I think your articulation of that is just wildly helpful to people to understand that, like, you don't have to have a specific skill or experience, just hands, at a
Right.
lot of these locations. And that, yeah, just call your local housing authority, and if there's someone sitting there like you, you will find a way to put them to use.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's a really great message, and thank you for sharing. And Cindy, I've really enjoyed our conversation together. So I'm excited. I have two more questions that I get to ask you before I let you get back to your day. The first, I'd love for you to share a story from your time in multifamily with our listeners.
I don't even know where to start. There've been so many. I would probably say, and I always go to my FFS stories only because, again, until I worked at the housing authority, I did not even know that that was a thing. It's very easy to get burnout in what we do. I mean, we deal with people's housing and we take it seriously, but it's a 24-hour business. And so, my rejuvenation is always when I see the things full circle. And I used to work the later shift, so 10 to 7 when I was in Alexandria. And there were two other team members that would work. But it usually was just us because nobody was coming into the office that late. And somebody was knocking on our door. When we went to look, it was a lady with two small children, a toddler and an infant. And this is in the dead of winter, and the kids barely had on a coat. So, of course, we opened the door, and she's explaining to us that she was in a domestic situation. This is not the area that she's from. She came here with the person, and she was just stranded. And this is why I say you always know that it's divine intervention. The staff member that was there with me was my FSS coordinator, and she also was a licensed clinical social worker. So immediately she clicked. kicked into social work mode. We got a referral, we got her temporary housing, and then ultimately a voucher. And she moved into an apartment, and she did stay in the city of Alexandria. But she ended up getting into the FSS program, of course, because of her engagement with our FSS coordinator who assisted her. And when she graduated from the program, she actually left the program early, but she came into the office and we did not know. She walked in her cap and gown. She had just graduated from college, and she said the first thing that she wanted to do was to come into the office to thank us. And so I was like, those are the stories that kind of boost you in on those hard days. We're like, oh my God, why did I decide to do this for a living? That's the reason that I decided to do this for a living.
Yeah. Oh, chills. That's a really beautiful story, Cindy. And the fact that she came back to your office in her cap and gown to say thank you and
Mm-hmm.
to show you the impact you had on her life. It's huge. It's huge. Well, my last question, and I hate it because I've truly, truly enjoyed my time with you, Cindy. And actually, I have a few requests for you coming out of this. So I will be reaching out to you after this podcast because I have a few requests.
Okay.
And for our listeners, you might be able to see if Cindy says yes to some of these on my LinkedIn profile. But I have some ideas that I'd love to share with the world. But I'll bother you with that offline. But my last question, and then I hate to have to say goodbye, but my last question, is there a book that you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
I thought about this because, at least according to my sister, I'm a nerd because I only read self-help books. But it's the only thing that holds my attention. So I tried to go through my phone today, like what could I list? Um,
I love self-help books, so you're not going to bother me with one.
the most recent thing that I have started, but I did not finish it yet, but I do like it, is The Courage to Be Disliked. It's
Oh,
Cairo Kishima, and I'm probably butchering his name, but it was definitely not what I expected when I started. So, and I'm a paperback kind of girl. I'm used to holding the book. So getting used to that electronic with the light is not my thing. So it's probably taking me much longer, but I think it's going to be a good read. So anybody that decides to pick it up that's into self-help, they wouldn't be disappointed.
oh, I love that. Actually, just the title in and of itself has me hooked. Um, I'm a I'm an interesting person. You might actually agree with this, though, from the conversation we've had so far. I actually don't mind confrontation or change or conflict. Like, it just doesn't bother me at all. Most people, I think, of course, I actually went to law school, so that's like, but, I don't mind confrontation.
Right.
But, I think a lot of people really shy away from it or really become uncomfortable. And I almost feel like that's where I thrive. And I do feel like sometimes that can create distance between me and others.
Yeah.
So I love the topic of this book. What made you pick it up?
I usually do. And again, missing the days of just being able to go into, major bookstores and spend a weekend or a Saturday there. That used to be my stress reliever. So now I always have my apps on my phone. Bookly is usually where I take my recommendations from. So of course they look at
Okay.
what you read, but you say what your preference is, and it'll make recommendations for you. And that was one of the books that had been just riding in my recommendations for quite some time, and I finally pulled it down probably 2 months ago. But it's never taken me that long to read a book. It's not a big book, but it's just dividing my attention for other responsibilities. But I plan on finishing it
Well,
before the end of this month.
I get it. Sometimes you can prioritize reading and sometimes you can't.
Right.
Life's demands change constantly. Well, Cindy, thank you so much for prioritizing this time with me. I really appreciate it. Your message has been absolutely phenomenal. Your experience in and knowledge of the affordable system has been incredible. And honestly, the way you're giving back to your community and your residents and then sharing all of that here with us on this podcast has been incredible. I have truly enjoyed our conversation and I really appreciate you taking the time to do this with me.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this as well.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Multifamily Grit. I hope you enjoyed hearing Cindy Thompson's inspiring story and her vision for the future of affordable housing. Cindy's journey is such a powerful reminder that leadership, creativity, and community-centered thinking are what truly drive impact in public and affordable housing. We also want to give one more shout out to Fortress, our episode sponsor. Fortress is committed to revolutionizing affordable property management with smarter, more efficient solutions that keep communities thriving. If you found value in today's episode, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with a colleague who would enjoy Cindy's insights on leadership, dispelling myths about affordable housing, and building stronger, more resilient communities. Until next time, stay gritty, stay passionate, and we'll see you back here soon.